Our primary source for this deep dive is, well, it's the work of Nathaniel Chipman. He's kind of a lesser known but brilliant figure from the American founding era. And his writings on government and liberty. They'll be our compass as we navigate the uncharted territory of Martian society.
Sounds good to me.
So what's fascinating about Chipman is that he was already challenging conventional wisdom back in the 18th century. He didn't buy into the whole noble savage idea that civilization inherently corrupts humanity. He saw government not as necessary evil, but as a force for good, essential for human flourishing. And that's a key point, right? Because on Mars, we can't afford to see government merely as a constraint. We need it to actively enable our survival, to orchestrate cooperation in a way that's never been attempted before.
Absolutely.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Chipman was adamant about protecting natural rights. He believed these rights are inherent to all humans, regardless of where they live. So the question is, how do we define and protect these rights on Mars, where even the most basic right to life is constantly at risk?
Well, let me give you a very concrete example. Imagine a critical failure in the colony's main oxygenator. Repairs will take 48 hours, but there's only enough emergency oxygen for 80% of the colonists at full capacity, or 100% and reduced capacity.
That's a terrifying scenario, almost like a real-life trolley problem, but with even higher stakes.
Yeah.
So do you ration oxygen equally, risking everyone? Or do you prioritize key personnel like the engineers who can fix the problem, potentially condemning others?
It's tough. A purely utilitarian approach might say to sacrifice the few to save the many. But how do you even begin to calculate who's most valuable? What about those who might not be engineers, but they possess skills crucial for the colony's long-term survival? Doctors, educators, artists who maintain morale.
Exactly. It's a nightmare scenario. And there are no easy answers. We could explore a lottery system. But how do you weigh it? Contribution to the colony, age, skills essential for long-term survival. It forces us to confront very uncomfortable questions about the value of human life, questions we rarely have to grapple with on Earth.
Right, and it highlights a fundamental tension between individual rights and the needs of the collective. On Earth, we have the luxury of debating these issues in relative safety. On Mars, the stakes are life or death.
Absolutely. And it's not just oxygen. Every resource on Mars is precious. Water, food, energy. How we allocate these resources will shape the very fabric of Martian society. Do we prioritize equality, efficiency, need? It's a tightrope walk between ensuring basic survival and fostering a sense of fairness.
Right, and not to mention the psychological impact of living in such a confined, high-pressure environment. Even with careful screening and support, tensions are bound to arise. Imagine the pressure on relationships, the potential for conflict over limited resources, the sheer mental strain of living under constant threat.
It's a recipe for disaster if we're not careful. We can't just transplant Earth systems wholesale. We need to design a society that anticipates and mitigates these challenges, a system that's both robust and adaptable.
Warning, dust storm approaching Sector 7. Atmospheric pressure fluctuation detected.
And then there's the wild card, Elon Musk and the Syndicate. They're the ones bankrolling this whole operation, and their motives are a bit of a mystery. Are they truly committed to building a just and sustainable society? Or do they have their own agenda, their own interpretations of Chipman's principles?
It's like we're writing a constitution in a shadow puppet show. We can see the shapes, but we don't know who's holding the strings or what their end game is. It adds a whole layer of complexity and uncertainty to the challenge.
That's it.
So are we truly free to follow Chipman's vision? Or are we pawns in a larger game? And if Musk and the Syndicate DO have their own ideas about Martian society, how will those ideas align with our own?
That's a good question.
The questions mount. The answers elusive. But on a planet where every breath is a testament to human ingenuity, perhaps even the most audacious ideals can take root.
The question that keeps me up at night is this: can 18th century principles truly serve as the foundation for a 22nd century Martian society? It's a fascinating thought experiment, but this isn't just an academic exercise, Aris. We're talking about the lives of real people, in a very real, very unforgiving environment. Sometimes when I'm grappling with the technical complexities of life support or resource management, the allure of a benevolent dictatorship is hard to resist. Just imagine the efficiency, the ability to make tough decisions quickly, without all the messy debates and compromises of democracy.
But who gets to choose this benevolent dictator, Jax? And how do we guarantee their benevolence endures? Power has a way of corrupting. even with the best of intentions.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm not advocating for tyranny. I'm just wrestling with the realities of survival on a planet where one wrong decision can have catastrophic consequences.
And that's precisely why Chipman's emphasis on individual rights as a check against power is so relevant. It's a safeguard against the very scenario you're describing. A collective that doesn't acknowledge individual rights can never be truly healthy or sustainable.
It's a delicate balance, that's for sure.
Well-
We need a system that's efficient and responsive, yet also protects individual liberty and prevents the concentration of power. It's a challenge that would make even Chipman scratch his head.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Picking up where we left off, Jax, I understand your concerns about applying 18th century principles to a 22nd century Mars colony. But remember, we're not trying to create a carbon copy of Earth systems. We're using Chipman's work as a foundation, a framework for building something entirely new.
Fair enough, but to build something new, we need to understand the blueprints. You mentioned Chipman's articulation of natural rights. What exactly did he have in mind?
Well, he identified 4 key rights: the right to life, liberty, property, and the right to character. These are all interconnected, forming the bedrock of his vision for a just and flourishing society.
Okay, let's unpack those, starting with the right to life. We've already touched upon the complexities of that one in the context of the oxygenator scenario. But how does it extend beyond mere physical survival?
Right, for Chipman, the right to life wasn't just about breathing and eating. It was about having the freedom and security to pursue your own goals and happiness, to live with dignity and autonomy without being arbitrarily deprived of your life by others or the state.
That's a beautiful ideal, but how do we translate that to the Martian context? Take the issue of mental health. Let's say we have a colonist who, despite our best efforts at psychological screening and support, becomes deeply unhappy and disillusioned with life on Mars. They're not a danger to others, but they're clearly suffering.
We need to respect individual choices while also providing robust mental health support and creating a sense of community and purpose that makes life on Mars feel meaningful and worthwhile.
Okay, and speaking of individual choices and potential conflicts, let's move on to liberty. What did Chipman mean by that?
Well, for Chipman, liberty was about freedom from arbitrary constraints, both from the government and from other individuals. It was about being able to think, speak, and act according to your own conscience, as long as you don't infringe on the rights of others.
Again, noble ideals, but what about freedom of speech in a Martian context? Let's say we have a colonist who starts a blog criticizing the colony's leadership or policies. What if those criticisms start to undermine morale or even incite unrest? Do we have the right to censor them?
Communication link status. Earth-Mars delay. 14 minutes, 22 seconds.
Chipman was a fierce advocate for free speech. He believed that a free exchange of ideas, even dissenting ones, is essential for a healthy society. He'd likely argue that censorship should be a last resort, used only when there's a clear and present danger to the safety and stability of the colony.
But who gets to decide what constitutes a clear and present danger? The colonized leaders. That seems like a slippery slope.
We could have an independent judicial body, something like a Martian Supreme Court, to adjudicate these kinds of disputes and ensure that freedom of speech is protected.
That's a good start. An independent judiciary is crucial for any society that values individual liberty. But even with the best intentions, I can still foresee problems. Imagine a charismatic but reckless individual who uses their platform to spread misinformation or sow discord. They're not directly threatening anyone, but they're chipping away at the social fabric of the colony. What do we do then?
That's where Chipman's emphasis on civic virtue and education comes in. He believed a free society depends on informed, engaged citizens committed to the common good. We need to cultivate those values in Red Planet Republic. We need to teach people critical thinking, media literacy, and how to engage in respectful dialogue, even with those they disagree with.
So you're advocating for a Martian Enlightenment era, a society that values reason, education, and open debate.
Exactly, a society where individuals can flourish and contribute to the collective good. I think Chipman would approve.
I admire your optimism, Aris, but even in a utopia, conflicts are bound to arise, and that brings us to property rights. What were Chipman's views on that?
Well, for Chipman, the right to property wasn't simply about owning things. It was about having the freedom to use and dispose of your possessions as you see fit, without interference. He saw private property as essential for individual liberty and economic prosperity.
That makes sense on Earth, but on Mars, where resources are scarce and even the environment is hostile, can we really justify private ownership of land, for example?
Yeah, it's a question we'll need to grapple with. Chipman might argue that individuals should still have the right to own and control the fruits of their labor, whether that's a plot of land they've cultivated or a piece of technology they've invented.
But what if someone claims ownership of a vital resource, like a source of water or a geothermal vent, and then uses that ownership to exploit others or hinder the development of the colony? Does the right to property trump the needs of the community in that scenario?
That's where the concept of eminent domain comes in. Even in Chipman's time, it was understood that the government could, under certain circumstances, seize private property for the public good as long as fair compensation was provided.
So we might need to impose some limits on private property rights on Mars for the sake of the colony's survival and well-being.
It seems inevitable, Jax. We're talking about a society in a pressure cooker environment. We can't afford to let individual greed or recklessness jeopardize the entire enterprise. We need to find a balance between individual rights and the collective good.
And how do we strike that balance? Who gets to decide where the lines are drawn? These are tough questions, Aris, with no easy answers.
You're right, Jax. These are questions that will require careful thought, debate, and compromise. But that's what makes this whole project so fascinating. We have a chance to learn from the past, to avoid the mistakes of Earth, and to create a truly just and equitable society on Mars.
Now, what about this right to character that Chipman mentioned? That one seems particularly intriguing, especially in the context of a Mars colony.
It is. Chipman believed individuals have a right to protect their reputation and standing within the community. He considered slander and libel serious offenses that could damage a person's livelihood, relationships, and sense of self.
That makes sense in a small, tightly knit community where everyone knows everyone else. But how do we apply that to a Mars colony with potentially thousands of inhabitants?
It's a challenge for sure. We might need to develop new technologies and social norms to manage reputation in a digital age. Perhaps a system of mediation and conflict resolution focused on restoring relationships and addressing harm. We might also need to carefully consider how we regulate social media and the spread of potentially damaging rumors.
And how do we balance the right to character with freedom of speech? What if someone expresses an opinion that's unpopular or even offensive, but doesn't spread actual falsehoods about another person? Do we limit their speech to protect someone's reputation?
That's a tough one. We need to distinguish between legitimate criticism and malicious attacks. We need to create a culture where people feel comfortable speaking their minds, even if they disagree, without fear of being unjustly accused of slander or libel.
It sounds like we're back to the importance of fostering a virtuous and well-informed citizenry, people who understand the importance of truth and fairness and who can engage in respectful dialogue even when they disagree.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the importance of education. We need to educate our Martian colonists, not just in science and technology, but also in ethics, critical thinking, and conflict resolution.
You're painting a picture of a Martian society that's not just technologically advanced, but also morally and intellectually sophisticated.
I believe that's the only way we can create a truly sustainable and thriving civilization on Mars. We need to be more than just survivors. We need to be thinkers, creators, and builders of a new world. I agree, Jax. We need to be more than just survivors. We need to be architects of a new society, one that embodies the best of humanity while learning from our past mistakes.
Yeah, that's a powerful image, Aris, but let's bring it down to Earth, or rather Mars. We still have a mountain of practical challenges to address. How do we create a fair and impartial justice system? What kind of economic model will work best? How do we make decisions about resource allocation, environmental protection, and countless other issues?
You're right, Jax. The devil is in the details. Even if we agree on these lofty principles, translating them into concrete laws and policies will be a monumental task.
For sure.
Should we have a direct democracy, a representative republic, or some kind of hybrid system? Will we have a president, a council, or maybe something entirely new?
And let's not forget the elephant in the room, technology. Some of our sources suggest a significant role for AI in governance, from enhancing voting security and transparency to mitigating bias and providing citizens with personalized information.
It's a fascinating idea, Jax. Imagine an AI system that could analyze vast amounts of data and help us make more informed, equitable decisions.
Right.
But we need to proceed with caution. Technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill.
Absolutely.
We need to ensure that any AI systems we use are designed ethically and are subject to human oversight and accountability.
Yeah, we can't just hand over the reins of power to algorithms, no matter how sophisticated they may seem.
Right.
Ultimately, the decisions about how we govern ourselves need to be made by human beings, guided by wisdom, compassion, and a deep understanding of what it means to be human. Aris, this whole conversation has been a real eye-opener for me. I tend to focus on the practicalities, the nuts and bolts of making things work. But I'm starting to appreciate that the social and political dimensions are just as important, if not more so.
It's all interconnected, Jax. We can't build a sustainable society on Mars without considering the ethical, social, and political implications of our choices, technological or otherwise.
Right.
We're not just building a habitat, we're building a civilization. And the foundation of any civilization is its values.
Okay, so what's the next step? Do we start drafting a Martian constitution, or are we still too early in the process?
Well, I think we need to hear from the people who will actually be living on Mars. What do you think? What kind of society do you want to see on the Red Planet? What values and principles are most important to you? Do you trust Musk and the Syndicate to guide us wisely? Or do you think we need to be prepared to push back against their influence? These are questions that will shape the future of Red Planet Republic. The answers lie not just with us, but with all of you. Join the conversation. The future of Mars is in our hands.
Syndicate directive received. Awaiting decryption.